Hey, everybody. I am so excited to have Michael Layman here with us today. Michael is not only a good friend for many years, but has been with the International Franchise Association as their head of political direction. So Michael runs the political department. Michael can give you his official title, but suffice it to say that Michael has actually been named one of the top 100 most influential people in Washington, D.C. But Michael is always so gracious and political and wants, more people in that group that he got them to expand the group to the top 500 so he could be more inclusive. And that is true, by the way. Michael is one of the most influential people in Washington, D.C. And so we're just so thrilled
Well, the
to
first
have
part's
you
not
here.
true about the 100.
We appreciate you having you on the podcast today. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you, Todd. This is fun. I'm such a big fan of you and Christy and everything you've accomplished, and big fans of this community and of FranFaith that you guys have helped build. And so this is an honor.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, and I'm glad you brought up FranFaith because when we started talking about bringing more people of more faith and many different faiths together in franchising and help bring them together in a community and just love up people more. When we first started socializing that idea, Michael was one of the 20 powerhouses that jumped in and said, hey, this is a great idea, and I'll be one of the co-founders. So we appreciate your support in that too, Michael.
Delighted to help. I know I haven't done much, but if I have contributed in any way, it's helping to move internally on the IFA team, the prayer breakfast at convention every year from the graveyard shift to a more reasonable breakfast hour. So that's happy to have accomplished that.
Well, just that move alone, we had 475 people sign up for the prayer breakfast, and so it was a smashing success this year. And so we appreciate your help with that too. Hey, a lot of times people of all walks of life, watch our podcasts and see our clips, and they oftentimes wonder, all right, I see this successful guy, lots of influence, great career in Washington, D.C. How did you get your start? I mean, take us back. How did you ever end up getting into this, and what was that journey?
Well, thanks, Todd. First of all, I've lived in DC for 25 years. I'm originally from the Midwest. I'm married to my best friend Christy. We have 3 daughters, age 13, 10, and 7. So that's where we're at. But of course, I'm not really a franchise business person, right, Todd? I'm a Washington DC person at this stage, who's come to franchising from working on Capitol Hill and becoming a policy person in the nation's capital. So I'm 11 years at IFA now. I'm franchising's lobbyist, and that's just such an honor, Todd. I mean, working for IFA and serving this membership is just such a privilege, and it's such an enjoyable, because to know a franchise person, whether it's a brand executive, whether it's a franchise owner with one unit or has a more sophisticated operation, or any of our suppliers. I mean, the diversity across franchising coast to coast. To know a franchise person is to love them. It's just very, very enjoyable, not just to advocate for the business model in a secular sense, but it's the most meaningful part is stuff like this, and connecting with the real franchise business people like yourself, like all of the brands and franchise owners and people that serve this business community. And so it's a thrill. Yep. And that's why I've been here 11 years, of course, across the IFA team. We have a lot of people who've been at IFA for a long time.
What did you do before that? How did you get into this? Did you get a political degree, and then were you up on Capitol Hill when you said you're in, what'd you say, 25 years in Washington, D.C.? What'd you do before IFA?
Yeah. So, I'm a lobbyist now. Of course, I don't really like to affiliate with those people because, some of them are questionable, but I'm happy to lobby, happy to be franchising's lobbyist. But I grew up in a small Midwestern town of Champaign, Illinois, college town, and in college, wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And we can talk about the faith aspect of this as well. But in college, really fell in love with the West Wing TV show there in the late 90s. If people remember that. And I thought that looked that really looked fascinating. So I sort of steered my studies in the direction of not just political science, but communication. And then I came out to Washington to do a summer internship with one of my home state senators. And I caught the bug, decided that's worth pursuing. So after I graduated college the following year, I just moved to DC. I had a UPS box full of all my earthly possessions, and that was it. And I started knocking on doors on Capitol Hill till I got a job answering the phones and opening mail for someone. And that was in the summer of 2001. My first day on Capitol Hill was September 4th, 2001. 9/11 was the next week. My formative days on Capitol Hill were all based on 9/11 and the anthrax mailings that were coming to people who were opening mail in congressional offices, which was me, among others, and all of the Homeland Security and 9/11 steps that took place after that and the change to really American life. But those are my first days away from home. Those are my first days away from my family and introduction to DC. After several years on Capitol Hill, worked for a couple other operations, but again, IFA now for the last 11 years, and it's a thrill to be franchising's lobbyist.
Well, wow, that's really interesting just to even kind of have that background. Every time I've gone onto Capitol Hill with you on any of the IFA fly-in days, which, by the way, if we have franchisees or franchisors listening or watching, it's really important for you to make sure you get involved with the IFA fly-in days. I was actually there going way back at the first one in, the first one was actually in 99 or 2000, somewhere in there. And so we were at the first one. Okay. And then I remember the September 11th one was canceled right after nobody could fly in 2001. So we had one or two, and then all of a sudden it got canceled. And then, of course, it went on, and I've been at most of them. But every time I'm with Michael, you are so connected to everybody, you know everybody. And I wonder, how does that come about? Is it just you've just been up there for 25 years, so you just get to know everybody?
Well, Washington is a lot like franchising in this way, that it's a relationship business and it's a relationship community. So as much as technology and AI changes what we all do, it's really about who you know more than what you know in Washington. There's a lot of lawyers in Washington. There's a lot of technical experts, and every industry is represented here because of the need to be at the table in Washington, no matter what your interests are. There's a Washington longtime saying that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So if you're not present, if you're not involved, then your interests are going to end up being affected, put it subtly. Yeah. So, and so relationships are what it's all about, whether it's my time, and I'm 25 years now working on and around Capitol Hill at this point, Todd. And so that's a lot of friends, that's a lot of people. And, this is where our faith comes in, is, the way you treat people in Washington goes a long, long way. And I've worked hard to not just serve the IFA membership, but hopefully be a good friend and be someone that's, that people want to hang out with. That's kind of what it's all about. And if you love God and you love people, that also has professional applications.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, let's talk about that for a minute in terms of faith. How did you come to faith in your own life? What's your story?
Yeah. So, Todd, I grew up in the church in Champaign, Illinois, and I went to what you might call a mainline church, and a lot of people do, and that's great. And I loved that church growing up. We had a great youth group, great families. We had a really erudite, regal man as our pastor, and he gave really thoughtful sermons from week to week on the daily grind, and they were topical in nature. But what I found as I went to college and went out into the world, and I met my wife, Christy, in college, who was more evangelical in her background. And she started asking me questions like you have about my faith background. And I, essentially said, went to church, and then she would use language like, well, when were you saved? And when were you born again? And when did you become a Christian? And I really didn't understand that language at the time because, my church growing up didn't talk about being born again, didn't talk about Nicodemus's encounter with Jesus in John chapter 3 and the need to you commit your life to Jesus and be saved. And so it was in college, in InterVarsity, and then at the church that we ultimately landed at in the Washington, D.C. area, Arlington, Virginia, where we go still today, where I was exposed to the gospel and having a relationship with Jesus. And that has changed everything. And so I am someone, based on my upbringing, who probably shouldn't be an evangelical Christian, probably shouldn't have faith in Jesus the way so many mentors have led me to. And specifically my wife, Christy, is the one who Christ used to particularly save me. And it was, it's been wonderful. I'm just finishing now, since we've been here for 25 years, I just finished a 6-year term as elder at our church in Arlington, Virginia. And, that was a wonderful experience. We've loved our church for multiple decades now. And getting to be on the church council was a wonderful experience because, that's not a full-time job. I have a full-time job at IFA and serving the franchising community, but I was right there in it with our vocational pastors who do this as a full-time job. But, the Bible makes no distinction between vocational pastors and lay pastors and elders. And so, again, I was right in it on all the things with our pastors and other elders at our church in serving people and shepherding souls and helping marriages that are just starting out or needing mending or deciding budgets and giving out benevolent fund money and making sure, and even doing some teaching and preaching and leading. It was remarkable because I'm not a guy who has any training. I didn't go to seminary. I'm just a guy who loves Jesus. I love reading my Bible. I love thinking about doctrine and learning from people who did go to seminary, who have much more training to explain why the world the way it is and where we're all headed in the future and why we should have any hope of for eternity. So our church teaches to love God and love people, those two top commandments that Jesus gives. So we love our church, and by God's grace, I did my best as a church leader. I'm back off the council now, which feels good to be able to focus on family and franchising because it was a remarkable part-time job for 6 years at the thickest part of my career at IFA, and it was a real blessing.
Wow. Well, there's so much there to unpack. First of all, I just kind of want to comment on the fact that Christy, your wife, that she helped spark some of that interest, and that the Holy Spirit got a hold of you and your relationship with Jesus now. That's amazing, and praise God for the women in our lives. My Christy as well. Is very similar, and sometimes those wives and their faithfulness helps us guys, to keep us on the straight and narrow, and then you work together as a couple. So first, I just wanted to comment on that. What a blessing it is to have Christy and your daughters in your life to help lead. But secondly, wow, in your story where you got active in your faith, what I was hearing you say is you started to be in the Word every day and how so much of that comes alive. And then you turned and you started to serve others, both in leadership, but also in ministry. And you made a really interesting comment where you don't separate a lay pastor from a full-time vocational pastor. And I think through much of history, the Apostle Paul and so many others, Paul was a tent maker and Peter was a fisherman, and the word pastor was hardly even utilized. So throughout probably almost into the 1800s, a full-time pastor wasn't even a thing. Everyone had a vocation, but then they had their faith woven into their life. And so you made a number of profound statements there, Michael, that I loved, that you're applying your faith on a daily basis by serving others, which is really awesome, first off. But how does that you mentioned, on Capitol Hill, loving people, and how do you translate Jesus and your love of Jesus into working on Capitol Hill then? How do you apply it?
Look, sure. And, DC's certainly, like a lot of big cities and professional settings, is a pretty secular town. And faith and religion, sort of like the other taboo subjects, doesn't come up in, private dinners and meetings. But, for me, being a believer is not like believing in the Easter Bunny. It is completely a head and heart engagement. And yes, I believe Jesus has changed my heart. I believe it changes everything about how I treat my wife, about how I treat my kids, how I treat my colleagues, both in franchising and elsewhere in DC and otherwise. And I love what Malcolm Butler said on this program a few weeks ago, Todd, talking about being a servant leader and how important that is to him and how the Bible calls him to that. And, when I think about if I didn't have any faith, and maybe Malcolm would say the same thing. I mean, without faith and without hope in eternity of what Jesus has promised us, servant leadership would be sort of like, well, what's the point? If we're just on a blue marble flying through the universe and there's nothing else out there, then servant leadership seems awfully hard to motivate toward. But then the head, so my heart has changed. But then on the head and the intellectual side, you brought up the disciples and their lay professions. None of them were obviously trained. Jesus plucked them off of the sidewalk and the shores to follow him. And their example is incredible because, 11 of the 12 of them, went to their demise following Jesus. So they were eyewitnesses. They believed Jesus was exactly who he said he was. And of course, the 12th, John, just was exiled. So they all truly gave up their lives to follow Jesus. And then you look at the rest of the Bible, and you have 40 different authors writing 66 books, all pointing to an fall of man and then the redemption and restoration that we have in Christ. And oh, by the way, there's 4 gospels within those 66 books written by 4 very different authors, all with their own accounts of Jesus walking the earth, living, dying, rising again, ascending, and promising to come back. And so, compared to, and that's what I believe. And a lot of people believe other things, and that's fine. The intellectual and historical foundations of the Bible are just irresistible. And so many who have dived in to refute it have gotten sucked in and become believers. And so it affects, when you have that faith, it's so hopeful and it changes everything about your life, as you know.
Well, Michael, it's interesting that you talk about how that faith is applied on a daily basis. So I imagine you, like me, you look at people differently. You look at people in your daily walk a little differently. You love them up. Your natural inclination is to be kind to them and to provide them with love. And so I imagine if you carry that out further on Capitol Hill, if you take somebody that maybe disagrees with your political view, that maybe a better way to look at them is that they're a soul that God loves, just like he loves you and I. And that he's another soul, another man or woman that God loves as his child. And whether they're saved or whether they're not saved, you're going to try to do your best to love them up the way God would love you. And so that it almost becomes, when you're living by the golden rule or Jesus's words, you're almost looking at it a little differently, I imagine. That somebody could disagree with you on many, many different topics, but that you're going to love them up anyway and treat them that way. And that's probably really hard to do in today's political environment, but I think it's probably what God calls us to do based upon what you're saying, because the salvation and God's love for them and their eternity is what's really matter. None of these little skirmishes are going to matter 500 years from now, but our eternity does matter.
Todd, that's beautiful and accurate, and probably more thoughtful than the way I am day to day when I'm dealing with people. But I think because I'm a sinner, we're all sinners, and
Yep.
we all fall way short of earning a ticket to heaven. So we're going to need some help getting to heaven, and the Bible's clear about the path to getting there. So, but I think where I come up short in relationships and with people, I think it's that heart change that keeps me, by the grace of the Spirit, from flying off the handle when I'm frustrated or when I'm angry because I see something that seems unjust, either professionally or politically or something that affects my job. So it's, again, DC is a relationship town, and there's a lot of burned relationships among principals in government, and soap operas playing out in Washington headlines every day about, and most of those come back to, if someone loses their job or they have a downfall from, public opinion, most of that comes down to relationships and how some of those people were treated. So,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we were created for relationship. DC is just like franchising is right in the middle of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. And it is sad that it does seem like it's gotten to a point where because of that, DC is a little dysfunctional today. And so clearly we
You've
need
noticed.
we need a lot more of you loving people up in DC than the divisiveness. So, man, I just love that so much, Michael. Hey, so tell us a little bit, because we do talk about faith and franchising. What are you working on this year on the franchising side on the agenda? I know you got some big stuff cooking.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Todd. So, I mean, what we do is advocate for the franchise model, which is, of course, not an industry. It's a growth strategy used by the 200 plus industries within franchising. So, we're a little different than nearly every type of trade association industry group because we have so many industries and types of businesses in the franchise model. So, but we advocate for structural franchise model issues first and foremost. We've got to we work to improve franchise relations. Again, back to how we treat people, making sure that policymakers see the importance of strengthening the franchisor franchisee relationship, but also getting the employment law rules around franchising rights at the federal, state, and local levels. That's always job one. We got to make sure that McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts and Massage Envy and UPS stores are, and their owners are able to operate independently so that the Dunkin' Donuts of the world don't dissolve over time and become Starbucks and
Yeah.
become corporate chains, because that is not the value proposition in franchising. So,
Yeah.
over the last decade, there's been one, and look, we do advocate on taxes and very excited about the tax law a year ago that is going to mean a better bottom line for franchisees and franchisors for years to come. And in this economy, that's really important. We'll advocate on other issues, healthcare, immigration, data privacy, minimum wage, overtime issues when they pop up because of the disproportionate treatment of some of those policies on franchise businesses. But at the end of the day, our job one is protecting the franchise model. And specifically what that means these days, as you know well, Todd, is making sure lawmakers get the joint employer liability rule right, that they draw clear lines, that there's a balance, essentially a direct control balance, so that franchisees can be independent, but if franchisors go over the line and impose too much control, that's not best franchising either. So there's a bill in Congress here in 2026, the American Franchise Act, that would be a generational landmark relief and law of certainty for the franchising community. That is our top priority this year. There's a whole movement in the IFA membership and really other business groups across the country to get it done this year before 2026 is over, because we are not promised what the future will look like politically. There's a cracked open window, narrow as it may be, to get it done this year. And that's what we're pushing for, because that would install a clear rule for joint employment liability for the franchisor and franchisee model, and would make sure that future regulators are not able to monkey with that standard, as we've seen them do 5 times over the last decade. And, franchising is not better off for it. We have a good rule right now that still stems from the first Trump administration. It was the 2020 joint employer rule. There was one both at the Department of Labor and the National Labor Relations Board. So there's really 2 joint employer rules, and those are law of the land right now. IFA helped defeat the NLRB joint employer rule in federal court. So that's the reason there's a good rule right now. But that good policy for franchising is only as good, Todd, as the current administration.
Sure.
And whatever happens in 2028 means that that law is likely to change again. And that's what we're here to pass the Franchise Act to do, is to ensure that certainty endures into future administration.
Yeah. So if I were to state it back to you, you've been so successful, I think even in the first tax law in 2018, I think you were very effective at getting the LLCs along with the C Corp on the tax cuts, so that helped lots and lots of small business, not just franchising. But you guys were very effective at doing that. Then you've been very effective at helping the joint employer to protect employees and their employers. You've been very effective. You were so effective last year on no tax on tips for so many service employees, including salon and massage envy folks, that really blessed many, many service employees. And so you've been very, very effective at Washington, D.C. at doing this, including the joint employer issue. But at the end of the day, it sounds like, to clarify, that the franchisee is the employer. They're the ones that employ the people in the local market. Those are the voters, and those are the employees. And the franchisor is managing the brand and selling units oftentimes. They're adding to the units, setting up systems, setting up software. They're not managing the employees. And so this American Franchise Act essentially codifies that, or puts it into law once and for all, so that regulators aren't twisting and turning back and forth and saying, oh, you are a big company or you aren't a big company, and there's confusion in the marketplace. And you guys are trying to move that ball down the field now with this American Franchise Act, it sounds like. And so, yeah, we're behind you.
Yeah, Todd,
Go ahead.
Thank you. I love that you've restated that, wearing your franchise owner hat and all the hats you've worn in franchising, Todd, with your experience, because that's exactly right. Some are under the impression that franchise owners don't need to shoulder the responsibility of being an independent owner. And if something goes wrong, some would be under the impression, among misguided regulators, that you as a franchise owner would want your presumably deeper pocketed franchisor to share liability with you if something goes wrong, as if that's how it works.
Right.
And it's just pulling the wool over people's eyes when they argue that
there's no...
It's all about franchisee independence. If franchisees aren't responsible for their store level actions, then they're not independent. And it's not franchising. So, of course, right, franchise owners want to be independent. They want to be their own employer. And that's what this issue is all about.
Yeah, no, I think that was well said. At the end of the day, as a very large franchisee in several systems, we are the employer and we set the culture. We do the hire and the firing decision. We think that we take good care of our people, and we don't really want anybody messing with that. We don't want the franchisor touching that. And frankly, they don't want it either. And we also kind of look out in the future, and we don't want bigger and bigger lawsuits on something employee related to go and try to attach the franchisor that just attracts more attorneys and bigger cases. And so that's what this tends to be about as well, is the legal liability. We are a small business. We love our people. We take care of our people, and we are the employer. And that does need to be defined and separated for sure.
It's exactly right. And I think I mentioned that, franchising is not better off for the changes in the vacillations by regulators in the joint employer standard over the last decade. And it was one of our, David Barr, whom many of us know at a board meeting last year, said, to him, joint employment, what that has meant for franchising is it puts a chilling effect on doing the right thing. Because if franchisors are worried about unpredictable joint liability flank, then they're going to be reticent, hesitant, or just decline to provide some of the communication and best practices that the franchising community should be known for and should be key to the value proposition in franchising, why you go into business for yourself but not by yourself.
Yeah.
Is to get that support from your brand. There's been a chilling effect, unquestionably. Every brand does it differently, but there's been a chilling effect on some of that information sharing. And that's the impact of joint employer. If we can get the American Franchise Act done, Todd, that certainty would be unleash what franchising promises in a new way. And that's a pretty awesome thought to have.
Yep, completely agree. All right. Well, Michael, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your background. I learned some new things about you today, and love the fact that you started in the congressional offices opening the mails, so you understand how the bowels of things work, and then worked your way up to a top position in DC and of great influence. Thank you for sharing your heart and your faith and your service and your love of people. And thank you for educating us on the American Franchise Act. We'd love to support it. And any of our listeners or that hear this, how can they best support this, and how can they? What do they need to do? Do they need to get in touch with you or write their congressman? What would they do to wrap up?
Yeah, the easiest thing to do is go to the franchise.org website, the IFA website, and under issues, we have a whole page on the American Franchise Act on a host of resources and opportunities to, in a few clicks, write your member of Congress and just keep the drips filling the bucket of advocacy so that the bucket tips over and we win by the end of the year for this whole 3% of GDP that's represented by our friends in the franchising community.
Yeah, it's huge. All right. Thank you, everybody. Michael Layman, I appreciate your help. Have a great day.
Thanks, Todd.